Mike Melara is the CEO of Catholic Charities, among his many other talents. So with that, I just want to jump right in and hand it over to you, Mike.
Well, thanks, Danielle, and thanks for that welcome. Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank the Community Foundation for inviting me to be here today, and I want to thank all of you. Monday mornings are tough, right, to plan a training session, so I really appreciate you joining me today. I'm excited to spend the next little bit of time with you. Lots of fun things to talk about. I'll just say off the bat, I have no idea how this is going to go. I hope it goes well, but you will be the judge of that. And just a couple things I want to cover before we jump in. The first thing, I'm not going to have you all introduce yourselves. First off, there's a lot of you. It takes a lot of time to do introductions. We don't have a lot of time today. I realize I'm violating some sacred training rule by not having you do introductions. But let's face it, there's always one or two people who just kind of wander off the path during introductions. So there's not going to be any introductions today. And the second thing that we're not going to do today, we're not going to go into breakout rooms. I know that's probably a huge disappointment, but I'm not going to force you to go to a virtual room to talk about things that you just really don't want to talk about. So there will be no virtual rooms today. And the third thing, it's just an acknowledgement. We're all familiar with Zoom and Zoom meetings and Zoom presentations. And I think what's become really normative, right, is this idea that we participate in a Zoom training or a Zoom meeting, and then we do other things, right? We check our email, we work on a budget, we write a proposal, we put our grocery list together, because we believe that we can actually do two things at once. I'm not sure we can do two things at once, but what I want to acknowledge is that there's a great temptation. I get it. There's great temptation to do other things during this presentation. I'm going to ask you to resist that temptation. I work for Catholic Charities. I work for the church. So I'm an authority when it comes to resisting temptation, because we're really good at that at the church, resisting temptation. But what I will do is my level best to try to keep you engaged in this session today. So again, really glad that you can be with me. I did want to talk a little bit about my background, and this is just really an excuse for me to talk about my dad, who's kind of like my favorite person. So I grew up in Watertown, New York, where there's probably about 2 feet of snow there already. My dad was a business owner in Watertown, and he was born in 1930. He was born at the beginning of the Great Depression. He was the oldest of 5. And when it came time for him to graduate from high school, he wanted to go to college. And he talked to my grandfather about that. My grandfather said, no, you're not going to college. My grandfather had a plan for my dad. My grandfather had invested money in a corner grocery store, and in Watertown, there were tons of corner grocery stores. And my uncle was actually running that corner grocery store. And apparently my uncle was not very good at math because the store was losing money. So my grandfather dispatched my dad to take over this corner grocery store. So my dad became a business owner at the age of 18. And when I was growing up, the business that my dad was in, because he had sold that business and done several others, but he was in the floor covering business, right, of all businesses. And I started working for my dad when I was 14 years old. So I've been working for nearly 50 years, which is a total bummer when I think about it. But I learned everything about the floor covering business from the ground up. I worked in the warehouse. I was a gopher. Hey, Mike, go for the tool chest, go for this, go for that, right? And eventually I learned how to install carpet. And when it came time for me to go to college, my father had scraped up enough money to send me to Lemoyne College. And I was the first in my family to go to college. And the plan was I would go to college, get my degree in business administration, and then I would come back to Watertown and run my father's business. I was the succession plan. So I go off to Lemoyne, and the first thing I do is I start volunteering, right? Getting involved with volunteering at nursing homes. I volunteered at a homeless shelter. I actually volunteered at Catholic Charities. And by the time I got to the end of my sophomore year, I knew that I wanted to change my major to psychology. And I knew I had to have this conversation with my dad. So I called him from fourth floor Davalon Hall, the residence hall at Lemoyne College. And back then, there was one payphone that was situated, next to the elevator, plunked in a lot of quarters. And I'm having this life-altering conversation with my father, right, about wanting to change my major. And it was probably one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had, because my dad was aware, he was seeing that his succession plan was evaporating, right, while we were having this discussion. But my father said yes, right? He said yes. He supported me in the decision to change my major and pursue a career in human services. And neither one of us ever looked back, right? And probably one of my proudest moments was when I became executive director of Catholic Charities. Shortly after getting appointed, I had my dad come visit me at the House of Providence, which is here on West Onondaga Street, this historic building, 81,000 square feet, big place. So my dad walked in and the place was packed with staff, and I'm taking them through and introducing them to people. And my father would say, he'd introduce himself. I'm Frank Melara. I'm Michael's father. Michael, he runs the place here. And I said, Dad, they know who I am, right? They actually know who I am. So my dad ended up passing away about 6 months after his visit to Catholic Charities. And I often think that, I'm privileged to do the work that I do. And I'm actually privileged to spend time with you all today because of my dad. My dad asked his father to go to college, and he heard no. And that forever changed my father's life. And I asked to change my major, right? And my dad said yes. And that forever changed my life. So the thought here is we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And as we start this training session today, I'd ask you to take a moment to consider your own story and who are the giants in your life? If you look down, whose shoulders are you standing on, right? And to take a minute to acknowledge that. So you probably want to know something about my professional background outside of crop dusting. No, I never crop dusted. I have been doing professional executive level work for the past 25 years in terms of leadership work. And then the last 17 years really at the executive level. I'm currently the CEO of Catholic Charities. I wear a couple of hats with the Diocese of Syracuse, but at the CEO level, Catholic Charities is a $66 million organization, 1,400 employees across 7 counties in the Diocese of Syracuse, and we're serving about 150,000 people a year. So you would think with that kind of background experience that I'd be some type of authority when it comes to leadership. And the truth is, I am still, and many of you, I'm sure, watching this today, I am still learning what it means to lead others, to be a good leader. And I believe that I'm never going to stop learning, right? It's the kind of responsibility where we are continuously learning. But there are a couple things that I've picked up along the way that I want to be able to share with you today. I will be using stories to make a point of a couple of the learnings. So hopefully you like stories. And if you don't, you can be doing other things, right? But hopefully you'll get something out of the stories. The title of today's presentation is Leadership Where the Mission Meets the Moment. And then during this presentation, I want to cover 3 different but connected ideas related to the role of the leader. And the first is the role of the leader as the keeper, defender, and interpreter of the mission. So that's the first area we want to cover. The second is the role of the leader as the chief architect of the agency's culture. And the third is how leaders must first be leaders of themselves and what that means for each one of us. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to cover each one of these sections one at a time. That makes the most sense. If you have questions, use the chat function and enter your questions. And then when we get to the end of a section, we'll take any questions that came up during that section. But I'm also going to give you an assignment, something for you to work on, a piece of homework for you to work on. And we'll give you a few minutes to do that. That would also be a time if you want to grab a quick cup of coffee. And then we'll move into the section. Next section, we'll do that 3 times. So I think I explained that okay. Okay, so let's, here's going to be the tricky part, right, of the presentation. I'm going to share my screen. I've gone to Remedial Share My Screen School. Look at that. Can folks see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Killing it. Okay, so hey, we're at part 1, right? The role of the leader is the keeper, interpreter, and defender of the mission. So, this leadership gig it's complicated, right? there's a lot of moving parts, but one of the things that we're constantly aware of in the life of an organization is that there are moments, right, that are constantly unfolding between staff and clients, staff and staff, the agency and the community, and on and on. And one of our challenges as a leader is, as we're kind of examining these moments, watching how staff are interacting with each other, with our clients, or with the community, we want to make sure that the mission of our organization is reflected in these moments. Our mission and our value. And I think that's one of the biggest parts of a leader. Part of our job is to be mindful of and looking for those opportunities to connect our mission to the work that's happening. So in some cases, it's very easy to do this. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. In some cases, it's very easy for us to do this. So at Catholic Charities, this is a good example for us. We operate a homeless shelter for men. And one of our core values connected to that shelter is this idea of hospitality. And when we talk about hospitality, it's much more than offering a guy a warm meal, a bed, and a shower. When we look at hospitality and how we try to bake that into our program, that core value, it starts right from the beginning. When folks come to our homeless shelter, they're not our clients, they're not homeless guys. We refer to them as our guests. The guys that come to our shelter are our guests, and we intend to treat them that way. So in addition to making sure that we can keep them comfortable at the shelter and making sure that they have their needs met, we spend meaningful time with each guest that comes to the shelter. We want to understand their story. We want to figure out ways to assist them. But the big part of this is we want to be able to treat them with compassion, dignity, and respect. And we're never going to give up on them, right? We're always rooting for the guests that we're serving. And one way that we demonstrate that we're not going to give up on the folks that we serve is we've operated a homeless shelter for 40 years. And in that 40 years, we've never turned anyone away who needed shelter, right? Who needed our assistance, which to me is the kind of the quintessential definition of hospitality, right? So we can see very clearly how that our value of hospitality is baked in to our program operations, and where the mission meets the moment, right? Where a guest walks into the shelter and our mission becomes tangible and real, and we can point at it. So we're always, as leaders, always looking for those opportunities to point those out. Sometimes, right, it's not as easy to see how mission and values are playing out in a particular job or activity in the organization. And I think this is where the leader has to play the role of the interpreter, right? The teacher, to be able to help every member of the organization understand how their work is mission critical. And we have to be very intentional about this. So a good example for us, like lots of organizations in our finance department, we have an accounts payable clerk, somebody who spends their day paying bills for the organization, right? Helping us to manage cash. So how is the accounts payable clerk, right, connected to the mission? They're not at the shelter, right? They're paying bills. Well, part of my job and part of our job is to help that payable manager see that the work that they do, particularly around helping us to manage our cash, right, has a direct impact on our ability to pay bills, our ability to make payroll. There's things like we have to pay for insurance, right? If we are running short on cash, that can cause shutoffs. There's all kinds of bad things that can happen to the organization if the payable function is not handled well, right? And if the payable function is not handled well, then that puts the entire organization at risk, which puts our mission at risk. So the payable clerk, right, is doing different work than the folks greeting our shelter guests. But both jobs are critical to the mission of the organization. And we have to kind of constantly be interpreting for all of our staff how their work is mission critical. So one of my favorite examples about this, I had a chance to work with a hospital CEO a while back. And I don't know, for you, when I think of hospitals, I don't like hospitals, but when I think about them, I think of high-end clinical services. I think about doctors, nurses, operating rooms. Those are the thoughts that kind of go through my head. And then there are the orderlies, right, who one of their jobs is to empty the bedpans, right? And when I was working with the CEO, here we go. I'm going to share my screen again. It's exciting. When I was working with the CEO, one of the things she talked about, she wanted to retool the training for orderlies and for housekeeping staff. And the CEO went on to say that, part of the retraining is you're part of the patient experience team. Your work has a direct impact on how patients experience the hospital, which will help them to recover more quickly. And when you think about particularly the orderlies, right, and the work that they have to do, it's probably one of the more humiliating aspects of hospital care, right, is that somebody comes in and performs this job. And the CEO is very clear about this. She talked about offering high quality patient care in a respectful and humane manner that preserves the patient's dignity. I love that, right? Preserve the patient's dignity. So we can talk about changing a bedpan, right, which is awful, right? Or we can talk about preserving the patient's dignity, which is done, right, through an exchange of one person working with a patient and how they handle this very difficult situation. So I think my job as the leader, and I would contend that your job as leaders, is to be constantly looking for, these moments where you can point to mission or help folks get connected to mission. I know I make a point of, when I'm making a difficult agency decision, I'm always going to use the mission as my reference point. When staff do great work at Catholic Charities, and I'm lucky that happens a lot, I always want to be able to connect that great work to how it's supporting the mission, right? The mission is our true north in all that we do. And like most leaders, I'm inextricably bound to the mission of my organization. So the last part I want to do here, and actually I want to share a couple of stories, because I said that, in addition to being the interpreter, we're also the defender of the mission. So I want to tell a story here. This is a story called The Grinch, AKA the executive director who stole Christmas. And this is a story. So all the stories I'm going to tell you are true stories, and they're usually where I, screw up. So you'll love some of these stories. But this is a story that happened about 13 years ago. I started Catholic Charities 13 years ago on November 4th. So I just finished celebrating my 13th anniversary with the agency. And when I arrived at Catholic Charities, there was like, oh my God, so much to learn, right? But I kept hearing about the Christmas program, right? Within days, a lot of excitement about the Christmas program. So I started asking questions about, well, tell me about the Christmas program. And back then, Catholic Charities had 6 neighborhood centers, lots of preschool programs, big parent education programs. So we were serving hundreds and hundreds of kids. And the way the Christmas program was described, it was that starting in November, we would solicit donors and ask them to provide gifts for all the kids that we served at Catholic Charities. And these gifts were all brought into a large conference room, which was like Santa's workshop, right? And then caseworkers would come in and pick not one gift, but like many, many gifts, right? For all the kids on their caseload. And they would wrap these presents, wrap these gifts, and then package them in these gigantic garbage bags, right? And then they would go and deliver the gifts. And so as I was kind of learning about the program, what I kept hearing from, the management team was, oh God, we just love the Christmas program, right? Christmas program is the best thing ever. We all get to be Santa Claus. The staff really enjoy it. It's the best part of their job, right, is to do the Christmas program. I said, okay. I said, can I tag along? Do you mind if I tag along for one of these deliveries, right? I just would like to see how this goes. They said, yeah, God, we'd love to have you come along. So me and this caseworker, who was super excited, we were heading to meet a family over on the north side, apartment. The family lived in an apartment building on the north side. So I'm going over the caseworker. We got this huge sack of toys, right? Caseworker's like, this is so exciting. Best part of my life, best part of the day. I get to be Santa. I'm like, yeah, okay. We make our way up a couple flights of stairs, knock, knock on the door. This very diminutive mom opens the door, right? And behind her, I see like 3 sets of eyes, right? 3 kids, right? And they're on high alert. So mom lets us in. Caseworker starts to, sets the sack in the middle of the living room and starts taking gift after gift after gift. Well, these kids, like they're jacked, right? They lost their minds, right? So I'm watching all this and I look over and there's mom sitting on the couch, right? Looking very bewildered, right, by the whole experience. So we finish up, jump in the car, we're heading back, and I started asking the caseworker questions like, so help me to understand like how you involve mom, right, in this whole gift program. How do you get her engaged? Does she, have an opportunity to select the gifts for her own kids? How does this work, right? No, what are you talking about? No, mom's not involved at all, right? We buy the gifts. This is about us giving gifts to our kids. I said, well, okay, mom not consulted that you don't? No, she's not part of it at all. I said, okay. So I ended up meeting with the management team and kind of similar questions. So help me to understand why we do this. What's the goal? What are we, and again, heard a lot of this is about, staff really enjoying themselves during holiday and being Santa. And no, we don't engage parents in any of this. We want to just make Christmas for these kids. And I said, okay. So I, as you can imagine, was troubled by the Christmas program. And like any good executive, I consulted our mission statement. And this is the Catholic Charities mission statement. And where I got to in that mission statement, the sentence that jumped out at me was empower, right? We strive to empower those that we serve to transform their lives. And we really think about empowerment. And when I started thinking about the Christmas program, it was kind of like, hey, Houston, we have a problem, right? With what's going on here. So the Christmas came and went that year, right? And I met with the management team in January the following year. And I had put on the agenda the Christmas program. Want to talk about the Christmas program? The managers were pretty excited about this, right? That I wanted to talk about this. And I remember starting the meeting saying, hey, I want to, make some changes to the Christmas program, a couple of tweaks. And they were like, oh, well, what do you want to change? And I said, well, the big change is we're going to end it. We're going to end the Christmas program. Come again? Yeah, we're going to end the Christmas program. And I said, let me tell you why. right? Let me tell you why we're going to end the Christmas program. First, we're not in the business of operating programs to make staff feel good, right? That's not our mission, right? We're in the business of empowering people, right, to be able to take care of themselves and their families. And I said, even poor families, poor parents have an obligation to make Christmas for their kids. We can't let them off the hook, right? And they don't want to be let off the hook. Even poor families have to make Christmas for their children. And we are so lucky because in our community, we have this thing called the Christmas Bureau. Probably many of you are familiar with the Christmas Bureau. I said, and parents can register their family for the Christmas Bureau, and then they can show up on a distribution day, and they can work with a personal shopper, and they can select gifts for their own kids, right? They get to pick the gifts for their kids, and they get food and books, and then they get wrapping paper, and then they take all that home and they wrap it up, and they go crazy like every other parent goes crazy during the holiday, but they get to make Christmas for their kids. And our job, right, at Catholic Charities, right, is to help parents to make Christmas for their kids. And what that means is we help them figure out how to participate in the Christmas Bureau. That becomes our job, right, in this work. So at that point, I became known as the Grinch who stole Christmas. And I think I had to run to my car every night for about a week because people were very unhappy with this decision, right? But I felt a huge need to protect and defend the mission of our organization. And that first Christmas was kind of rough, that transition Christmas. But now we have built in, right, in our programs and services, this work with the Christmas Bureau, which really allows us to play an appropriate role. We have no need to supplant the role of parents, right, when it comes to making Christmas. Our job is to support them in that work. So that's what got played out, right? And the Grinch that stole Christmas was this need to defend the mission. So that was one time where I actually thought I got it right. So I'm going to do one more story and then we'll open it up for questions and we're coming to the end of part one. Dara, are we doing okay? So far, so good? All right, good. All right. If you tell me no, then we'll stop right here and I'll get a cup of coffee. All right. So this second story is one where it could have gone better, which is like one of my favorite sayings. This could have gone better. So I had mentioned before that we operate a homeless shelter for men. And I'm in the habit of visiting the shelter often. And it was during one of these visits where I encountered two guys this is an area where folks have a meal. Our guests can sit, watch TV, like a little recreation area, have a meal. But during my visit, I observed these two guys that were sitting across from each other, and one of them was working on a piece of artwork. And this is an actual picture of what the guy was drawing. So I was intrigued, right? So I ended up sitting across from the artist, and to the left of me was this other guest. And I tried to start a conversation with this artist, and he was Hispanic, so we were unable to communicate with each other. But his friend to my left was like, he was kind of functioning as translator. So he was doing the introductions. He goes, hey, this guy, this is Juan. Juan does great artwork. He's really talented. And I was like, yeah, this is kind of cool. So the guy to my left, right, he taps, I'm paying attention to Juan and not paying attention to this guy. He taps me on my arm. He has pulled up his sleeve to reveal this hand-drawn tattoo on his wrist. So the guy says, my buddy, he drew this tattoo. And I looked and I said, yeah, okay, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And I immediately went back to Juan, right, and his kind of working away at his drawing, right. For long, I get a second tap on my arm, right? And I look over, and this time the guy had pulled up his sleeve to reveal a tattoo on his forearm. And same thing, my buddy, he also did this tattoo. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool, right? And kind of a little bit dismissive on my part. And I'm back to watching Juan, right? And all that he's doing, right? So I get this third tap on my arm, and now this is taking on biblical proportions, right? 3 times, right? And I can feel myself. I'm annoyed, right? I'm getting annoyed, and so I snap to look at this guy, right? And he has basically pulled off a chunk of his shirt, right, to reveal this gigantic tattoo on his shoulder and arm and chest. And I thought to myself, Mike, unless you start paying attention to this guy, you're going to see a lot more of him than what you want to, right? You're going to see a lot of this guy that you just don't want to see, right? So the story here is I am the executive director of Catholic Charities, right? And my job is to pay attention to the person in front of me, right? To pay attention to the person who is looking to get my attention, right? So what this guy was telling me is, notice me, please notice me. But I was so distracted by wanting to watch this little artist guy do his thing that I had failed to execute on the most basic part of our mission as an organization, which is to pay attention to the person in front of you, right? Who has a story to tell. So once I did that, right? Once I stopped paying attention to the artist and started talking to this guy, his name was Jim, by the way, the story that he told me was this artist friend who did all these tattoos on him was a friend that had really struggled with addiction and had not too long ago passed away from an overdose, died from an overdose. And Jim, who also struggles with addictions, who had been clean for several weeks, was contemplating starting his drug use again. And in that moment, the conversation with Jim, right, became infinitely more interesting than any piece of artwork that could be presented, in front of me. And it was an opportunity, right, an opportunity to spend time and understand, what Jim's concerns were, and to give him the space, right, to tell his story, which again is part of our work, part of our mission at Catholic Charities. So we all have a responsibility to make sure that we are interpreting the mission, understanding the mission, and defending the mission. And that's certainly part of our job, and one of the valuable lessons that I've had to learn along the way. So I'm going to stop here. We're finishing up on the first section. How did we do there? All right, we did about 35 minutes. So it can take any questions, and then I've got a quick assignment for folks.
All right. So we did have 2 really good questions come in. The first one's from Linda Lopez, and she asked, do you have a process or activity that you've used with your staff and or board to identify and focus on core values?
Yeah. Hey, Linda. I love Linda Lopez. She should be up here doing this training today. There is nobody better at fidelity to the mission than Linda Lopez. So Linda, one of the things that we've incorporated, and I'll talk about it a little bit later in the next couple of sections, as a way to highlight the mission, is we use storytelling. Storytelling and mission moments, but storytelling has become a way for us to first talk about the work that we do on behalf of the folks that we serve. And then secondly, to identify mission critical elements that are being represented or illustrated through our stories. So storytelling is built into every one of our management team meetings, and it becomes almost a bit of an educational session that, as the story is told, we stop at the end and we either I will or we'll kind of open it up for how's the mission of our organization represented in the story. So that has become probably our single greatest tool. And the second tool that we use to kind of draw attention to mission work is the recognition work that we do with our staff. We are big on employee recognition, but not recognition for recognition's sake. Anytime we do employee recognition, anytime we do a shout out for an employee, anytime I send a note to an employee, we're always tying that behavior, that above and beyond behavior, we're tying it back to how it relates to or reinforces the mission. At the board level, we could be doing better, right? We do a fair amount of mission work at the board level, but we could be doing better at that, and that's an area for us to continue to develop. That's a great question. Thanks, Linda.
All right, and then the next one is kind of two-part. So Martha Sturts wrote, part one, did you change the mission statement when you joined the organization, or was it the same as it is now? And the second part is a little bit connected to the last question of what type of training do you provide staff so that they all support the mission?
Okay. So when I arrived, the mission statement, chunks of the mission statement were intact. The part that I read to you a few minutes ago was intact, but other parts of the mission statement changed probably about 5 years later. But what remained consistent in the mission statement was this notion of empowerment, right? From when I first arrived to the revised mission statement that we did 5 years later, core value for us is to work in a way that empowers, the people that we serve. So great question. And, like a lot of organizations, when we went through strategic planning, we reviewed the mission statement. We really like the one that we have now. But that value is consistent. And then the second thing, the way that we train staff, we do a lot of staff training at Catholic Charities, but we're very intentional about the front end training when we're onboarding staff. We spend a lot of time with staff as a senior management team. I spend time with new staff talking about the work that we do here and how it's connected to mission. We continue to work on leadership training for our staff that's mission focused. So it's a combination of efforts, right, that we do to keep staff aware of and apprised of the mission. Good question. Anything else?
Martha just wanted to comment. Yes, I feel a simple, direct mission statement works well to keep all on track. Well done.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
So you wanted about 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen because here's the exercise piece that I want folks to work on. And then we'll jump into the next section. So here are questions that I really want you to spend some time thinking about. Grab a cup of coffee, and then we'll, in a couple of minutes, we'll move into the next section. But how do you currently defend your mission? That's a real question. How do you help others to understand your mission? So how do you play a role in interpreting and helping folks to understand the mission? The third is, sorry, I'm going to move people. Where are your programs, practices out of alignment? This is a hard question, but most folks running program or leading agencies have a notion of where things might be out of alignment with their mission. So, and then this is a picture of Sean Connery from The Untouchables. It's one of my favorite movies. And he was in the habit of saying, what are you prepared to do about it? So as you identify places where you might be out of alignment, the question is, what are you prepared to do about that? So those are questions. This is not a take-home exam. I'm not going to be collecting papers from all of you after this. This is really meant for you to spend some time to think about these questions. I think, Dara, we can take a couple of minutes if you want, and then jump into the next section. Does that work?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
We'll see you back at 10:48.
of it. I got water. No, I'm good. What's that? I gotta put myself on mute.
Okay, it is 10:48, so we'll get started here in just a sec. Mike, if you're all set, if you want to unmute.
Okay, great. So let's jump into the next. We're going to talk about the role. Is that me? We'll talk about the role of the leader as the chief architect of the agency's culture. So this will be fun. So probably one of the most important things that we all work on, leaders and senior management, and really it's the obligation of all of us in organizations, is to build agency culture. And I think we're always looking at this relationship between the agency mission, values, and the subsequent culture that we want to be able to build. And I think that in the ideal world, right, there's a reciprocal relationship that exists between building a strong agency culture and having adherence to your agency mission. And in the end, there has to be congruence between mission and culture. And sometimes that's hard to see if there's congruence between mission and culture, but it's really easy to see if it's not there. So maybe you work for an organization that part of its mission talks about treating people with dignity, compassion, respect, but the culture, the actual agency culture, is marked by more of high reactivity, dismissiveness, less than charitable behavior to staff, right? So when these behaviors are in conflict, when behaviors of the organization, when the behaviors promoted by the culture are in conflict with the actual mission of the agency, then the mission at some level is compromised, right? The mission becomes almost like a bit of a joke, right? So this misalignment between mission and culture will really erode the goodwill of our staff, right? And people, our employees, our staff will become disillusioned. And that workforce disillusionment has never been greater than it is right now, because we've been experiencing and going through the Great Resignation, right? It's been incredibly difficult to retain staff, to hire staff. An article that I was recently reading that I want to share here talks about the Great Resignation. And oops, sorry. So this is an article from Workplace Evolution, and it talks about this Great Resignation, and a couple of pieces that kind of really jump out here. And I know this is a lot to look at, but 55% of Americans anticipate looking for a new job over the next 12 months, right? Companies continue to struggle to retain talent. And leaders often don't understand the real reason why people are resigning. And one of the important pieces of information here is that, through this McKinsey study, what we're learning is it doesn't always have a lot to do with compensation, work-life balance, or mental health issues. The big issue is that folks do not feel a sense of belonging at work. And particularly folks who are from historically marginalized communities, right? So instead of really thinking about this as the Great Resignation, the authors are suggesting that this is really the Great Awakening, right? Individuals are waking up to the realization that they deserve to be in organizations, right, that respect and support them. So, the article does suggest, right, that there's things that we can do to, create more connection for our staff, give staff a sense of belonging. When I think about building agency culture, so much of it is about being able to connect staff to the greater good of the work that we're doing. And rarely is building agency culture, rarely does it get accomplished by doing one or two things, right? One or two big things. It's really the exercise of doing about 1,000,001 little things, but doing them exceptionally well. And as we examine, agency culture and practices, what we've come to understand, right, is that there are experiences that we can offer to our staff that can actually help to increase motivation, help them stay connected, feel connected to the work that we do. And at the same time, there's other experiences that will actually decrease motivation. And one of the theories that I want to borrow from here is Herzberg's theory of motivation, right? You guys didn't know you were going to go to school today, right? And this is a piece of work that's been around for a long time, but Herzberg identified three experiences that exist in the work environment. And he labeled them satisfiers. These are things that are experiences that are available at work that actually, or activities, experiences that increase motivation on the part of our employees. There are dissatisfiers, right, which have the opposite effect, decrease motivation. And then there are things that that exist in the work environment that have, no value in terms of increasing or decreasing motivation. They have neutral value. So if we take this, kind of at its most basic level, right? What you're looking at is a nice desk and chair, right? And in Herzberg's world, the question would be, if you're a new employee and you're coming to work and this is your desk and chair, does this create satisfaction, dissatisfaction, or neutral value? And what Herzberg would argue is that this nice chair and desk does not create satisfaction, does not create dissatisfaction. It actually has neutral value. And the reason is that employees who come to work, they expect that they have a decent desk and chair to work out of, right? Just like they expect the restrooms to be clean, they expect the driveway to be plowed. These are things that employees just expect. And because of that, something like this just has neutral value. But if you come to work and this is your desk and chair situation, right? Then what will happen for that employee is that this can actually create dissatisfaction, right? So as we look, at the environment, sometimes the best that we can do in terms of motivating employees is a neutral value, right? So in the desk situation, it doesn't create motivation for an employee to have a nice desk, but it certainly becomes a dissatisfier if the work environment is not adequate. Same thing if the restrooms aren't clean, same thing if the driveway isn't plowed, right? These are dissatisfiers. So when we're building agency culture, right, what we're constantly on the lookout for, what are the activities, what are the things that we can do, what are the experiences that create satisfaction for our employees, which leads to motivation, which leads to connection, right? The ultimate connection that we want them to have to the organization. The other thing that we would pay attention to here is the quality of complaints, right? So as we're, again, down this path of, figuring out what are satisfiers, dissatisfiers, and neutral value, what we're constantly listening for as leaders are the quality of the complaints that come to us from our staff. And complaints are really divided into two levels. There are low quality complaints and high quality complaints. Low quality complaint is, yeah, my desk chair is uncomfortable. It's a dissatisfier. The best that we can do is get to a neutral value, but it's a low quality complaint, and should be addressed, right? What we're listening for as leaders, I think, are high quality complaints. And high quality complaints are things like, hey, I want to be more involved with decision making. I want more responsibility, for my piece of work. I want more autonomy around the work that I do. These are high quality complaints. So, nobody likes the word complaint, but listen for high quality complaints, because that's a signal that for your staff, kind of their lower level needs are being met, which is good, right? And now they're moving to that next level where they want to continue to function at a higher level. So high quality complaints are really opportunities for us, right? Because if we don't address a high quality complaint, it will become a dissatisfier. If I can't have more connection to this organization, if I can't have more autonomy, if you can't figure out a way to engage me in the work that we do, then that's a dissatisfier. But if we can work on these, if we can figure out ways to keep staff engaged, right? If we can figure out opportunities where staff have more voice, employees have more voice around the work that we do, and that we're listening carefully to what it is that they have to offer, then that can very much become a satisfier. And that's one of the kind of the critical steps that we want to take, in building organizational culture. So I'm going to stop here for a second. So just a couple things that we do at Catholic Charities, and I mentioned this earlier around kind of building culture, right? This real intentional act of building our culture. And these are practices that we put into place that we think exhibit that, right? So we want a culture that, we want our culture to be recognized as one where there's care and support of our employees, but employees are also held accountable to the work that we do. The way that we kind of go about, implementing a culture like that, there's steps that we take, right? And these are simple. These are things, if you're not doing them already, you could make a quick list here. But one of the things that we do, and it's really about kind of a personal touch. Any employee who has served 1 year of service with us, I send them an email and congratulate them on their first year, right? And I'm sure many others are doing similar things. But if you celebrated 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you get a handwritten anniversary card from me to thank you for your years of service. And I can't tell you the number of times employees come back to me and just really appreciate, getting a handwritten anniversary card, and that we're noticing, right? We're paying attention to their years of service. We do the same thing with birthday cards. Every member of the leadership team gets a birthday card sent to their home from me, again, thanking them for their service. I mentioned when Linda asked the question earlier, we use our management team. The management team is comprised of about 50 managers of our organization. We get together about every other month. The first part of every management team meeting is to do shout outs. We want to recognize staff that have gone above and beyond. And these can be direct care staff. It can be any staff member can be promoted during a management team meeting for recognition. And we'll talk about why that person is being recognized, how that recognition ties directly to our mission, but also it kind of reinforces this culture of recognition, right? Where we want to catch people being good. And many times the way we'll thank somebody is I'll send them a handwritten note saying, hey, we talked about you at management team meeting. You did a fantastic job on the Smith case. And here's why we thought it was a fantastic job, and keep up the good work, right? So again, trying to help folks stay connected to the larger organization. I mentioned earlier that we do storytelling as another way, where we highlight the work of the organization and tie storytelling to our values and our mission. A big thing that we do is when staff are having a hard time, if staff have experienced a loss, right, a death of a relative, a parent, a loved one, we come together as a community and offer support to that staff person. I go to too many wakes and funerals, but I think it's important to show up and to be present with our staff when they're going through a difficult time like that. And again, that helps folks to stay connected. One of the big things that we've done during the pandemic is we've made use of a virtual environment. We do what's called Catholic Charities Connects. It's a live stream. Basically, it's like a mini TV show, I guess, that we do, but we do it about every other month. It's a live stream. We invite all of our staff to attend. It's Monday with Mike, and I spend about an hour providing staff with an update, and then they can ask me any question that they want to ask me, and they ask me some really good and hard and awful questions. But it's been a good, this pandemic has been difficult, but using live stream as a way to connect with staff, particularly staff that are out of our building and have a hard time getting here, has really been a great advantage to getting folks connected to our work. And I would say probably the biggest thing that we do, right, and we are pretty dogmatic about this, and we think it's crucial to the culture that we develop, is we provide supervision to our staff. And I know that sounds almost, arcane or basic, but providing one-to-one uninterrupted supervision for our staff is probably the most important thing that we do as an organization. If that supervision is going well, right? If there's a skillful supervisor working with staff, right? That becomes our primary method for making sure that staff get supported, that they're challenged in the work that they do, that we identify staff that might be ready to develop and move up to the next level. So there's professional development opportunities there. We really express our commitment to our staff in lots of different ways, but having that one-to-one protected supervision time is probably one of the most important things that we do. And it ties directly to this culture of not only wanting to support you, but to also, make sure that there's accountability in our system, right? To make sure that you have a safe place that you can go and express your worries and concerns. That becomes very, very critical to the overall development of our culture. So building our organizational culture, I contend that, we are the chief architects of building that culture. There are steps that we can take, as we look at satisfiers, dissatisfiers, things that have neutral value. That's that kind of a framework to kind of consider your own environment. But we're always looking for how can we increase satisfaction? How can we increase motivation, increase the connection? That becomes kind of a big part of our overall mindset as we lead and manage the organization. And then just the last thing to share about this, and it's really kind of a quick story, and then we'll come to the end of this section and answer any questions that you might have. So my staff know that I insist on hearing bad news immediately. I think that's out of The Godfather or something, but I insist on hearing bad news immediately. And this is a story from a couple years ago. Our maintenance staff person, a guy by the name of Mike, he had, and very sadly, his closest friend, his best friend, kind of like a brother to him, had passed away very, very unexpectedly, kind of a tragic situation. And our chief program officer called me after, in the evening to say, hey, I know you want to know bad news immediately, so this thing has happened. And I remember I called Mike that night to check in on him, and he was just distraught, right? He had a very difficult time, just very, inconsolable grief. So a couple days later, they had the wake and funeral services for his friend, and I went to the wake, and as I walked in, Mike was like the second person in line next to his friend's mom. And he came over to me and gave me this gigantic, bear hug. And he said something that I thought, first off, I'll never forget it. And secondly, I think it speaks to the kind of culture that we want to have here. He said, I knew you would be here. I knew you would be here, right? And I said, Mike, there is no other place that I would be but here today. So to me, that was a representation, right, of what a Catholic Charities employee can expect, right, from who we are and how we treat them. But to me, it's also reflective of the kind of culture that we want to build here, and a million and one things that we do to try to make sure that it's a productive, high quality experience for our staff. We're not perfect at it, believe me, but we are devoted to it, and we're very intentional about it. So that brings me to this section was a lot shorter than the first section, but it brings me to the end of this section, and happy to answer any questions that might have come up during this section, and then we'll move into the last section.
Okay, so we do have 2 questions for you, Mike. I'm going to ask Nan's first and then Martha's. So Nan, get this person in here. Nan asked, do you provide a template or tool for supervisors to use in their supervision sessions?
Yes. Next question. Yeah. Hey, Nan. Thanks for joining. We love the United Way and all the work that you guys do. So, and Monday morning. So thanks for being with me this morning. Yeah, Nan, we're like crazy intentional around supervision. So as we bring supervisors onto the organization, we not only have a tool, but we have this whole supervision policy and practice statement. There's a training that's connected to it. And then we provide them, it's essentially a documentation tool, but it frames out the kinds of activities that we want to have in supervision. And the first activity, the very first thing that we train supervisors on is to let your employee go first, right? When the employee comes in, supervision needs to be agenda driven. So your employee should be walking in with an agenda of things that they want to talk about. You should have your agenda of things that you want to talk about. You can exchange agendas, but then we have this tool that we take the supervisor through kind of the issues, the concerns, the worries that the employee might have. We're documenting that. If there's feedback that we're providing, we train staff on how to provide, positive feedback. There is an appropriate way to provide positive feedback, and it's not attaboy. It's really, hey, you did a great job, and let me tell you why, and give very specific reasons why we're providing that positive feedback, corrective feedback, and how to manage difficult conversations, right? So that's all kind of wrapped up into the training that we do with all of our supervisors, followed by a documentation tool. And supervision for us is protected time, it's scheduled time. Supervision is not meeting an employee in the hallway or standing in their doorway to have a conversation with them. That's a conversation. That's not supervision. Supervision, there's intentionality, protected, one-on-one, scheduled. People know when it's going to happen. They can count on it, right? And that's the space, right, where, that's where the magic happens, right, is in supervision. Great question. Thanks for that, Nan.
Okay. And then this last question is, Martha Sturts, can you tell us how issues caused by COVID-19 may have changed the way you meet your mission?
Yeah, we're all going through that, right? And when you look at our mission, at the core of our mission is this idea, and it's more than an idea, it's really a practice where we are connected to each other and to the people that we serve, right? It's like for us to not be able to provide direct service and be in the presence of the person that we're serving, being in their physical presence, is I've described it as being like oxygen deprived, right? It's so fundamental to who we are, right? And in fact, our whole service delivery is designed around providing indigenous supports and services. So Catholic Charities employees, we go to the family's home to deliver service. We go to the neighborhood. We're not in the habit of having people come to our office, right? We're out in the field doing this work. So it was a huge, huge shift for us to go to virtual work and to make this transition. So I think on the staff side, I mentioned that like using virtual platforms, live stream has become a really important strategy for us to stay connected, for guys like me to stay connected to our staff so I can see them and talk to them. And that by and large has been useful and effective. And we use not just my presentations, but a number of live stream presentations. The bigger issue has been on the service delivery side. And depending on who regulates you, if you're Office of Mental Health, Department of Developmental Disabilities, we've had to learn how to adjust to doing more work like this, right? To stay connected to the folks that we serve through these mediums. And I do think that that's had an impact on staff turnover and how fulfilling the work is for our staff, because I think, again, they've been oxygen deprived. So I think we, like a lot of organizations, have done our level best to stay connected to the people we serve. Last thing I'll say is we've got several programs where virtual just doesn't work. So we can't run a homeless shelter virtually. So we still have people, guests coming in every day and getting help. Our food pantries are not virtual, right? Our emergency services. And we've started to do more face-to-face work, over the last 6 months. But it has for sure been a challenge. The challenge is to stay connected to the people that we serve. And, I think we've done the best that we can in this environment. Thank you for that question. Other questions?
I think we're all good. Martha did just write a little note in the text. She understands, as the coordinator of the Mexico Food Pantry, but also as OCO board member, that it has made personal contact with people in the organization feel more served.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So I'm gonna give you the next set of questions for your consideration, and then I think, Dara, we can just give folks a couple of minutes on that, and then we'll move into the last section. If all goes well, we might be able to end a little bit early, right? So here's the next set of questions for folks to consider. What do you want your agency culture to be known for? So we've been pretty intentional about defining what we want our culture to be known for. Then what are the steps that you're taking to actively create that culture? As you think about satisfiers, what's missing from your list? What are things that you can do that would represent a satisfier in your organization? And then this last one, what are the quality of complaints that you hear? Are you hearing high quality complaints or low quality complaints? I'm not a Mike Tyson fan, but this is a quote from Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan and then they get hit, right? So as you develop your plan around agency culture, you know that you'll get hit, right? Things will come up, things will get in the way of as you work actively or intentionally on your culture. So I suggest, you give these questions a little bit of thought. We can do another really quick cup of coffee, maybe a couple minutes, and then we'll move into the last section. That work for you, Dara?
Sounds
Okay.
good. How about 11:21?
Sure.
Okie doke. Okie doke. It is 11:21.
You're good at the whole time thing, man. I'll tell you. Okay. So we're going to move into the last section here. How leaders must first be leaders of themselves before leading others. I bet everybody's super excited about this section, right? So, let's just start by kind of acknowledging that it's hard to run organizations, hard to be a leader, and the first thing that we're required to do, and I would say we're required to do it every single day, right, is to be brutally honest with ourselves in the service of our organization. And we have to be brutally honest with ourselves about our skills and our abilities and areas that we perhaps need to develop in order to best serve the organization. And when I think about leadership, there's probably four considerations, right? Attributes, I guess, that I think, and some of these you'll see in good managers, but I think they also are present in good leaders. So I want to take you through each one of these. And the first one is this idea of being a non-reactive presence. I would say that this, first off, good managers, good supervisors need to be a non-reactive presence. But I would also contend that good leaders have to be a non-reactive presence. And what I mean by that is, as leaders, we have to be able to tolerate bad news and not overreact. The last thing that we want, right, is for any staff person or anybody who reports to us hesitating to tell us bad news or information that we really need to have because they're worried about how we're going to react to that information. I've said it before, I insist on hearing bad news immediately. So I want to create a situation where staff or people that report to me can come in and share their worries, their concerns, the bad news that might be present in a program or a situation that we need to deal with. And I think this idea about being a non-reactive presence, what I see is the value in that is that it creates safety, right? It creates a sense of safety. You're creating this environment where staff can come in and feel safe and share what's truly going on. Now, that doesn't mean that, we're in love what they're sharing with us, right? Bad news is bad news, right? And we certainly have to react to situations that, are problematic or troubling. But I think the key here is to discipline ourselves to be as non-reactive as we can be, so that safety exists and you get the information that you need, right? You need to, if there's a big problem, you need to be able to hear about that and know that. So one consideration as we kind of come to know ourselves and kind of consider, how to be the best possible leader is to be a non-reactive presence. The second one, and this comes from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is to seek to fully understand, seek first to fully understand and then be understood. And what I would contend is this is just a lot more than just listening. It's really taking the time to understand the current situation from another person's perspective. So this is an investment of time and energy. And I know Nan asked a question earlier about, supervision practice. What I have learned, and I've learned this the really hard way, when it comes to personnel issues, if we have an employee who's reporting to us and they are performing poorly or there's a significant issue around their performance, the biggest mistake that I have made in handling personnel issues is that I assumed, right, I knew what was causing the personnel issue or the personnel problem. I made assumptions. And based on that assumption, I formed a conclusion, right? And I didn't take the time to fully understand why the person was behaving the way they were behaving. And the phrase that I've adopted, and my staff have heard this ad nauseum, right? But the phrase that I've adopted when I'm confronting a personnel issue is, help me to understand why X, whatever that problem behavior is happening. Help me to understand this. And when I'm saying help me to understand, that's code for I am concerned about your behavior, but I'm taking this extra step to try to understand it. I want to be able to understand it. And if you skip that step, right, if you think you understand it, bad things almost always happen, because, you know, in the course of that discussion, you learn something, right? Like, oh, geez. So take the step, take the time to be not to fully understand and to ask that question. So the other part of this is to be understood, right? Seek first to fully understand and then be understood. And for some of us, listening is really the easy part, right? We're good at listening. It's that second part of being understood, right? Where I would say we have to demonstrate courage, right? We have to be able to put ourselves in a position where we can be courageous to make sure that people understand where we're coming from. And I'd put a finer point on this. It's my contention that leaders must put themselves in situations where they demonstrate courage, where perhaps you take an unpopular position because of the values of your organization or the values of your, you know, your own personal values as they tie to the organization, but to put yourself in positions where you can demonstrate courage. It's a willingness, right? You're demonstrating a willingness to do hard things on behalf of the organization. So I think that, from my opinion, there's nothing harder in the life of an organization than when somebody loses their job through no fault of their own, right? When, you know, we have, sorry, I'm just, I'm gonna stop this for a second. When we have a situation where somebody is getting laid off, they're losing their job through no fault of their own, changes in funding, whatever, that leads to a layoff. And I think, you know, there can be a great temptation to staff out those conversations, right? And I'm of the opinion that this is a hard conversation. It's a difficult conversation, but it's one that, you know, I want to put myself in a position to have that conversation with staff, that I think, you know, they need to hear that directly from me. We're a large organization, and there's lots of different ways that conversation could occur. But I feel like it's important for me, you know, to do the hard thing, right? And to have this conversation with staff and to reassure them that, you know, we're going to do everything in our power to assist them. So, you know, we don't, when we can, right, we should take on the hard assignments and put ourselves in those positions where we can demonstrate courage. One of the stories that, you know, were, I think perhaps kind of an illustration of this for me anyways, and this goes back a couple of years, but we run a permanent supported housing program where we provide housing for the guests that come out of our shelter. These are chronically homeless men, and we help to move them into their own apartments. And we had a case situation a while back where we got an anonymous call that one of these guys, one of our clients in these apartments, was in possession of a handgun. Not a good thing. And this was an individual who had a significant mental health issue. So, and because of that, we were required to contact the Office of Mental Health. And so I was notified that the situation was occurring, and I happened to be out at a meeting just a couple blocks away from the apartment building where this individual was living. And I showed up at the apartment, and I could see our program supervisor, our caseworker, and two police officers. And they're developing this plan to figure out if this guy has a handgun. And as I kind of joined the meeting, the police officers are very quick to say, hey, listen, there's no crime that's been committed here. So we're not in a position to go into this guy's apartment. But you guys, it's your apartment. You guys are the landlord. You have keys to the apartment. It's really your obligation to go and check and see if this person is there. So we're having this conversation, and the caseworker, our caseworker for this individual, his name was Sean. Sean's like 5'10", probably about 250 pounds, big guy, right? Big neck, big hands, big shoulders, could twist me into a pretzel, right? So we're having this conversation. And it becomes really clear that Sean would be the guy that's got to go and, knock on the door to see if this client is there, right? This is becoming Sean's job. So I'm looking at Sean, and Sean he's pale, right? He's looking down. He's just totally pale. And I said to Sean, "Hey, Sean, how would you feel if I took this one? How would you feel if I, take this one on?" And I've never seen keys move so quickly from one person to another. Like Sean just, dumped his keys, and he was gone, right? He was gone. So I'm thinking, okay, let's go see if this guy is there. So it's one of those apartment buildings. It's like four stories, and no elevator. And I've got the 2 police officers with me, and we're climbing up the stairs. And by the time I get to the 3rd floor, I've really had a chance to consider this plan. And I'm realizing that this is probably the worst plan ever, right? That why am I doing this, right? By the time I got to the 4th floor, I thought I'm either going to die of a heart attack or I'm going to get shot. But one of these 2 things is definitely going to happen, because this is not the greatest plan ever, right? So we get to the client's apartment, and I'm thinking the police officers are going to be like, right here, right behind me. They're like 10 feet down the hall. And it's one of those deals where I'm knocking on the door, this is Catholic Charities, no answer. Put the key in, click, open the door. This is Catholic Charities, no answer. Well, as it turns out, the individual wasn't there, right? The individual wasn't there. And it also turned out that we later learned that he was not in possession of a handgun. But what was useful for me, and the reason I share the story, is that we often ask our staff to do incredibly courageous things, right? And I'm of the belief, right, that we should never ask a staff person to do something that we are unwilling to do ourselves, and that we should, when we can, put ourselves in those positions where we can act with courage, right, on behalf of the organization, and recognize, right, the amount of courage, the tremendous courage that our staff display every day. So Sean became like my best friend after that. Sean was totally digging Mike Melara after I decided to take that one on. And it was funny. I didn't think twice about it until I got to the 3rd floor, and I'm like, but we ask we ask our HR staff to do hard stuff every day, right? Ask our program staff to do hard stuff every day, our finance staff, right? Our corporate compliance staff, we ask them to do hard things every day. And we should be able to step in and do the hard things as well. I'm not suggesting that you don't, but it's just something to be mindful of. The very last thing on the list to talk about is, bring up the list again. Leadership is personal. And I think there's probably different opinions about this, but I think that leadership is entirely personal. You take the successes and failures of your organization personally. And you can try to convince me otherwise, that we shouldn't take it personally, but I would contend that we share the same DNA as our organizations. Good leaders share the same genetic makeup as their organizations. And, we are tied to our agency. So when things go well, I think we have a sense of satisfaction. But when things do not go well, we take it personally. And I think for me, the way that this got expressed and it's still a bit hard to talk about. But a couple years ago, I got a call about 8 o'clock at night from our chief program officer. And it was the kind of call you just never, ever want to get. And he said, Mike, we've had a stabbing at the shelter. One of our guests has been stabbed, and it doesn't look like they're going to survive. And they were stabbed by another resident at the shelter. So I made my way to our shelter, and the shelter had been roped off as a crime scene by the time I got there. And our guests, we had moved them all out of the shelter and into a central bus to kind of keep them comfortable until we could figure out what to do with them. We had about 50 or 60 guys that night. And what I had learned was that the guest that had been stabbed, he was actually in the shower. He was taking a shower, and a couple guys came into the shelter, not known, they were new to us. They weren't existing shelter guests, but they were obviously there to perpetrate some type of crime, and ended up stabbing this guy. And the hard part, it was all hard, it was all awful. But what I learned, because we have video cameras in the shelter, not in the shower facility, but the rest of the shelter, as I watched the video that night, I could see that the individual who had been stabbed, he was wounded, severely wounded, but ended up leaving the shelter area and was basically running around the dormitory. And our staff were trying to calm him down. Nobody knew what had happened, and that he eventually collapsed by one of the beds and bled out and died right there on the site. And we did a lot of work with our staff around this horrible incident, and it was not as if we had done anything wrong, right, as an organization. But for me, it was very, very personal, and it continues to be personal. And I had board members and others say, Mike, you can't take this stuff personally. And in my opinion, there's just no other way, right, to run an organization. We had a guest who died in my shelter. That's personal, right? I take that very personally and continue to do that. So it's for me, it's always the price that we pay, right? To run organizations, to do work that we love, to work with staff that we care about, to serve consumers that need our absolute best, right? There are certain prices that we pay to do this work, and one of the prices is that, at least in my belief, is that it becomes very personal. So that's all I have for right now. I do have one last set of questions for folks to consider. It looks like we may be able to get folks out a little bit early, but here's the last set of questions for your consideration. I don't know if there's questions, Dara?
There is one question. Would you like it now?
Sure.
Or after?
No, I'll take it now, and then I'll just finish up with a little bit about MFM leads, but go ahead.
Perfect. This is from Linda Lopez. She said, how do you address the highly productive employee who is not congruent with key elements of the culture?
Yeah. It's funny. I was just having this conversation with our CFO, it kind of talking about there are folks that we employ who have tremendous content knowledge, right? Can really execute on their job. And I'm talking purely functional now, but they may not. The other aspects of how they connect to the organization or how they connect to the team ends up becoming disruptive. And you know, what I've learned, and I've learned this kind of the hard way, is you can have high, you know, if folks are performing at a high level, but they're not adhering to the mission or the culture of the organization, then that's not a fit. There's incongruence there, and you know, I think, you know, we can do our level best to provide that feedback, right, around the expectation that, you know, you're doing a great job, but, you know, here's where I see you out of alignment with our mission, right, or with the culture of this organization. You know, we're always of the belief of giving folks a chance to get realigned and to kind of coach them, right, to provide that feedback and coach them. But in the end, if they can't align with the culture of the organization, even though they're doing a great job, what I know is that can become very destructive to the staff members around that person, right? That could affect the morale, that can affect the culture of a team or a program. And in those cases, those folks have to leave. They're just not a good fit for what we're trying to get done. So start with providing that feedback. You know, help me to understand why you are, you know, struggling to be a non-reactive presence, because, you know, you're reacting all over the place. You're really good at what you do, but you react all over the place, and staff are afraid to come and talk to you. So help me to understand what's, you know, we still have to do the work, but in the end, if we do the work and there's still that misalignment, then we have to always choose, right, kind of the mission and the culture that we are supporting over any one staff person. Other questions?
Nope, that's all from that part, and we can move on to yours.
Okay, so the questions for you all to consider in this, and we'll probably let you out a few minutes early here. When you are being brutally honest with yourself, what is one area that you know that you need to improve? And then how can you put yourself in those positions where you can demonstrate that skill, where you can make that improvement? I know for me, it's working with the media. I hate working with the media. God, I hate working with the media. So I have to intentionally put myself in positions where I'm working with the media. When I die and go to hell, I'll be in front of a camera, right? This media stuff is tough, but it's something I have to do. Where do you need to demonstrate courage? And how can you put yourself in situations to demonstrate courage? And I know leaders sometimes disagree with me on this one, but I think it's really important to figure out how to know, right, that you are demonstrating courage on behalf of your organization. So those are some questions for you to consider. And then the last slide for me is just, I wanted to just share with you, in addition to my full-time gig at Catholic Charities, I also started a small executive consultation, leadership, and coaching business. And I work with a small number of individuals, but if there's anything I can ever do to assist any of you, please let me know. The executive consultation is really geared for seasoned executives. And the way I would describe that is that where I intervene is what's keeping you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. If you got stuff keeping you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm really good at doing consultation work around those issues. I do traditional leadership coaching and also training. So if you'd like more information about the work that I do, all of my contact information is there, and I'd be happy to connect with you down the road. I love the work that we get to do in human services. I love the work that we get to do as leaders. Totally fascinated by leadership and all of its components. And I feel like I have a responsibility to help other leaders to be as successful as they can be. So, and I think that's it.